Hey guys, welcome to the DelCo Churchy Timey Time on video with...
Is that the official name?
Churchy Timey Time with Jordan and Brad.
And Novi.
And someone who has kindly chosen to spend time videotaping this and editing this for us, Sam. Sam, do you want to say hi or...
Hello.
Sam
is not only spending his time with us, but he's also exposing himself by breaking his self-quarantine.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Coming to our home.
Sam does not go to our church, but he has kindly volunteered to use his special gifts in video making and sound editing.
Very special gifts.
Very special gifts.
He's a special person.
But he's the youth pastor at Delaware Grace, and he's just kindly volunteered to do this with us. But Brad, we're in your home.
This is my house.
Why are we here?
Because it was convenient to record here.
And why is no one else here?
Oh, because of that there coronavirus.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate. We are all not supposed to be together, and it's very strange. There's a lot of questions that a lot of people have. But as we've been brainstorming the way to do this best, I don't know. Does this feel like one of the best way to do it? I don't know.
It feels like the best way to do it. We do miss you guys a lot. Obviously, we want to be with you all, and that's why we're really excited on Sundays to be having our normal gathering together, just slightly modified by doing it through Zoom. We're really excited to do that. But we also want to have an opportunity to bring you guys some scriptural teaching that you guys can view at your own leisure. So you guys can take this, do whatever you want with it, break it up into a few chunks. I think it's going to be about 30 minutes, so it shouldn't be too bad. But yeah, here we are.
Yeah.
We're excited.
Yeah.
Novi wants to play.
So we don't know how long this will last. We don't know how long we'll do something like this. It may change week to week. We're really just trying to figure out the best way to do it. But let's just jump in. We've been walking through Luke. Last week, I think we did Luke 11 with the woe to the Pharisees. And this week, we're doing Luke 15, a really pivotal passage called the prodigal son or the lost son.
And in this episode, we're going to be role-playing the older son and the younger son.
I would be the older son.
Yeah, you would
I'm
be.
a terrible person. But we just want to take a second, if you want to pause the video right now, for you to read this as a group out loud to yourself. Just take a minute, pause, and read this in whatever version seems best.
Shoo-boo-doo-boo. Good job, guys. Really happy that you paused the video. If you didn't, shame on you.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, we're going to do a fun section that if you've ever listened to the Film and Whiskey podcast...
You can't say that.
Oh.
The film podcast.
The film podcast. Yeah. You would know that it is called Brad Explains. Where Brad takes the passage, in this case, and explains it to you. So, essentially, we're just going to boil it down to its bare essentials. There's this dude, and he had 2 kids. Apparently, the dude did a really great job in business and farming and whatever the heck it was he did because he's really rich. And the younger son is like, hey, Pops, I need your stuff because I'm going to go make my own way in the world. Which was kind of rude, but the dad's like, sure, you can have it. And so the young guy takes his share of the inheritance, which, like, when you think about it, that's like, the dude probably had to sell off some of his land and, like, livestock and all that kind of stuff in order to get the money to give it to him for him to go off.
Right.
So the young guy goes off, and he kind of, like, goes to college in a certain way. He like, heads off. He spends his 4 years getting some liberal arts degree, and he just parties his butt off.
Stupid liberal arts.
Yeah. And so, like, he gets his degree, but at the end of it, like this is, like, way more political than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I don't know where you're going with this.
Long story short, he spends all this time partying, he spends all of his money, and he gets to the point where he has to get a job feeding the pigs. And, like, he's so hungry and making so little money that he wants to eat the slop that they're giving the pigs. And it's pretty brutal. So he says, you know what, my dad, his servants get treated better than I'm being treated. So I'm just going to go back, and because I already took the inheritance, I'm just going to say, you know what, Dad, I don't even have to be your son anymore. I'm just going to be one of your servants.
Right.
Because then he would treat me well and I wouldn't be so hungry. So he heads on back, And the dad has this like intuitive feeling that his son is coming back. It's very special. And he goes out and he meets him on the road, and he hikes up his long skirt tunic thing, and he runs on out, and he tells his son that he loves him, that there's no way he would ever consider him being his servant, that he is his son. And he kills the fattened calf, and he throws a giant feast for him. The older son, meanwhile, while younger son was off getting his degree, the older son is like working hard and hanging out at the house, and he's doing all the things right. He's just doing awesome. And so when he sees his brother come back, he gets really, really annoyed, and he's kind of like, what the heck, man? Like, I've been doing all this stuff, and you've never once killed a cow for me, which is something that I get very upset about. Why wouldn't you kill a cow for me?
You have half a cow in your freezer, though.
I do.
You have had a cow killed for you.
I do. If you guys ever need beef, my father-in-law sells beef. So I have a quarter of a cow in my freezer downstairs. Anyways, the older son gets really upset about it, and the dad is like, look, man, like, your brother was dead to us, and now he's alive to us. Like, let's get pumped about that. And that's it.
And we're left hanging.
And we are left hanging.
Yeah. That is a political version. No, I'm just kidding. That is the story of the prodigal son. And there are a few contextual and background pieces that are important to kind of have in your head for when we meditate and think about this story, for us to really understand it. First thing that's important to understand is that the people that Jesus is talking to are four groups. It says in the beginning of Luke 15 that there are tax collectors, sinners, Pharisees, and teachers. And we listened to the woe to the Pharisees last week. I don't know if we really talked about the role of the Pharisees. You kind of have people make fun of them and take a lot of...
They're looked down upon.
Yeah, it's not easy to view them with a lot of compassion. But in truth, Jesus had a lot in common with the Pharisees. He was trained like the Pharisees. He was trained in the law. He was trained in the scriptures. In truth, I have grown to love the Pharisees only because I know that if I'd been alive in the time of Jesus, I would have been one. Almost certainly. But they were really just Jewish leaders who in their own mind really thought that they were protecting Israel. They had seen all the terrible devastation that had plagued Israel over time, had known it was because that people weren't faithful to the law, and they said, we're never going to do that again. We're never going to let that happen again. So not only are we going to have people follow the law, we're going to create more laws on top of the laws to make sure people aren't messing this thing up so that God's wrath does not come upon us.
And the big thing is, we've seen people do this throughout the ages in the Christian world. So it's really easy to demonize the Pharisees, but like, how many of us had put rules on top of rules on top of rules to get people to do the right thing?
Totally. Like, they just wanted to keep people, but they thought they were just keeping people faithful. But obviously, as we know, and we'll say it time and time again, Genesis is the Illuminati. It is everywhere. It's in all throughout the Bible. We corrupt things because there's evil in our hearts. So even in their desire to keep people faithful, as we saw in the woe to the Pharisees, they were actually just putting burdens upon people that they were not willing to help people carry over and over and over again. And actually walking across these people who were supposedly the greatest of the great in the spiritual world, they were actually spreading corruption. And that is something that Jesus actively talked and fought against.
That's what he talked about the woes.
Yes.
That they're unmarked graves.
Right, correct.
That when people walk over them, they're corrupted, they're defiled.
Right. So this parable right here, he does 3 in a row in chapter 15, but this one is primarily aimed at the Pharisees. It's important to see that as we walk through. A second piece, and so here are just some things that are helpful to understand how the rest of this story plays out, just what Jesus is trying to communicate. In 11 through 12, when the younger son asked for his inheritance, like Brad was saying, this was not just like some small thing, but actually a severe act of rebellion. He is essentially, and I'm sure if you've studied this passage before or heard somebody preach it, you've heard this said, but he's essentially asking the father, like, I wish you were dead. He's saying, like, I wish you were dead and I had the money in place of our relationship. I want this thing instead. To be honest, if you were a first century person listening to Jesus tell this story, you would be saying, well, the only good move is for the father to disinherit the son. Like, that's the only way to do it. And the fact that instead he gives in and gives that to him, they would say, like, you're just lax. You're a bad father, right? Like, you're just not doing your job and raising your kids. You've got problems. They would have considered him pampering. But instead he gives it to the son, and the younger son goes out and he squanders it, right? Feeding pigs, where he ends up, what Jesus is trying to communicate there is that that's the most demeaning work humanly possible. So he has hit the lowest of the low. There's no place to go from there. Not only is he isolated because of his work and he's only hanging out with pigs, but he's isolated socially because pigs were unclean animals in the law. So he can't even talk to people. There's a reason that it says, like, people won't help him. It's because he's spending all day being unclean, to the point where he's trying to, like, pick out the carob pods in their slop and, like, nibble on them and try to eat, because that's the only thing he could expect him to. And many in the first century would have gotten to this part in the story, and they would have said, this should be the end of the parable. Like, this should just be a moral tale where, hey, the lesson is,
don't be greedy.
Don't be greedy. Don't ask for your dad to be dead. Like, don't get your inheritance early and then squander it all, because you'll end up with the pigs. But he doesn't end it there. As we know, like, these three parables are about finding something that was lost. So we go one step further. There's a third peak with the son's return. He is at the beginning of repentance. He was destitute and in need. And the father, in a weird take, if you were a first century person, the father runs to the son. And the reason that would be weird to hear is because that was a really intense breach of an elderly Jewish person's dignity, to run to somebody. If you were wearing a robe, he would have had to, like, hitch up his robe and, like, tie it up in the front to actually, like, run any distance, because robes, I assume dresses as well, are not ideal running materials.
I feel like we should cut from us sitting on the couch to, like, me on my knees, like, crying out to the Lord, and you hitching up a tunic and running to me.
It wouldn't work. It would be hard. So he would, basically what he's saying is, like, he would look silly doing this, but the father chooses to do it anyway. It's something that's, you would be asking yourself, like, why is he reacting in this way? And so he welcomes the son and begins a party. The robe that he gives the father, he says it's the best robe, and in that time it would be his father's robe. It would be his father giving his own robe to the son. The ring would be the family ring. And so essentially what he's trying to say is that it's a symbol. He's symbolizing that he's reinstating his sonship. Like, you have hurt me, you have done this to me, but you have not stopped being my son. And so he refuses to receive his younger son as a servant, as he asked, but instead says, you are back in the family. And then the fattened calf would indicate, like, and I'm going to throw a big party in response. The only other reason they might have slaughtered a fattened calf would be, like, for a wedding day. Like, that is how momentous of an occasion that he's trying to communicate. This is a really big deal that the younger son has returned. Now this, in the three parables, this should be the end of the third parable, right? In the first parable with the sheep, the guy finds the sheep, and that's the end. In the second parable with the coin, the woman finds the coin, and that's the end. In this part, it should be the younger son returns, and that's the end. But it continues with the elder son, right? The elder son is not at the party. He's being a real bummer.
Big old bummer.
Yeah, he's being a real bummer. In truth, if anything were true of this family, the elder son should be the one who is in the midst of reconciling the younger son to the father. That should be his role as the elder son. He should be excited about the reality that the younger son has returned and reconciliation has come. But instead, he is not there. And what Jesus is creating is a graphic representation of how much the elder son dislikes the situation, right? he is publicly, so it would not be a secret that he's not there. It's not like he's hiding in the corner trying to not be seen. He is publicly displaying, like, I do not approve of this celebration. And if you've ever been to a party where, like, there's a weird family dynamic, it's weird. Like, it's not good. It really puts a damper on the whole situation. Everybody's kind of bummed. There's, like, a weird spirit about it. You just can't have as much fun as you were hoping to have. It dampens the spirit. It shames the father. And by doing this, actually, again, if you were a first century listener, your response would be, oh, well, the father should disinherit this son. Right? Like, what he's doing is so shameful that the father should be like, well, get rid of this son as well.
What is it with these people in disinheriting?
Honor shame culture is intense. I don't know. Like,
now you did something bad.
Yeah.
Disinherited.
That's what he's trying to... This is such a big deal that he's not willing to do this. That the cultural response would be disinherit the elder son. But the elder son thinks he's so in the right. But instead, the father, again, he goes to the child. And he seeks reconciliation. The elder son emphasizes his service as opposed to his sonship in the same way the younger son did, right? He's like, I've been a slave to you all these years. And this is a very much an unveiled jab at the Pharisees who are listening. Jesus is just like punching them right in the stomach. And he says, like, this is how you function in the world. You're supposed to be children of the Father, but instead you've made yourself servants and slaves. You've emphasized one over the other. And in fact, the elder son has lost nothing in the younger son coming back. The elder son's inheritance is intact. There's nothing that's going to hurt him in the future. Like, he has lost absolutely nothing, but he's instead chosen to be intense and dislike it and have great distaste about what's happening. And we're left hanging, right? Like, the father says, like, you should be celebrating and you're not. And then we're just kind of like, and we don't know what happens to the elder son. We don't know how they're going to respond. And you're kind of left like, oh, bummer. Like, this stinks.
Well, I think one of the key things that you commented on there was the fact that the older son chose to be a servant for all those years, to be a slave to the father.
Right.
And I think the big thing about that is that it creates this distance between the father and the older son of, like, if you consider yourself a servant of someone, right, you're going to have some sort of deferential respect for them. You're going to look up to them, and you're going to keep a distance from them.
Right.
And so the father is saying, like, you should have been in relationship with me all these years.
Yes.
And you chose to distance yourself from me.
Yeah.
You know, and now that and the younger son, if you didn't catch it, is an analog for the sinners, tax collectors, the prostitutes that are hanging out with Jesus.
Right.
Now that they're all coming back to me, you're getting upset about it.
Correct.
You're getting annoyed.
You were actually happier when they got what they deserved.
Yeah.
Really. And you're unhappy now that they're finding freedom and peace.
Yep.
And that's just like a real... That church history testifies to this, that, like, even Martin Luther and John Wesley, this was a huge deal for them as people who were raised religiously, as priests and as fathers and whatever. They were very much about the reality that they almost had a secondary conversion from servant to son.
Yeah.
It's that intense for them because they so lived their life in a way that was like, I'm doing all these things for you, Lord. I'm learning theology and I'm ministering to my neighbors and I'm doing all this stuff, but they were not sons. They had not actually received the adoption that the Father had offered them. They were not comfortable in His presence. They had not sought reconciliation, and they were more happy when people had, quote unquote, gotten what they deserved than when they found freedom and peace and grace in the midst of all that.
And I think that's probably the key theme in this passage. Is that this passage, it's easy to look at it and go, oh, well, Jesus is indicting the way of the Pharisee, right? He's saying that that's bad. But I don't think that that's the core theme of what's going on here. You know, I don't think he's condoning it. But what I think he's saying is, guys, whether you're the younger brother, whether you're a sinner, a tax collector, a prostitute, there's grace and redemption for you. When you return to the Father, He is going to embarrass Himself by putting out love for you. Because we talked about how it's embarrassing for the older man to run to his son, right? Yeah. It was probably also super embarrassing when the younger son asked for the inheritance and left.
Right.
Like, all of his friends definitely knew about that.
Right.
It was probably embarrassing for him when the son came back and then he threw a massive party for him.
Right.
I'm sure everybody around was like, man, like, it's great that, little Jimmy is back, but you're going to throw a party for him? He's embarrassed you. He's shamed you
Right.
in the culture around you.
Yeah.
And so anytime we turn away from sin,
Right.
there's grace, there's redemption, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And then, conversely, if you're the older son, if you're the rule follower, if you're the person who grew up in church and you know how to be a Christian, you know all the right things to say, you know all the right things to do.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, that takes us into a bad place.
Yeah.
It takes us into a place where we put ourselves above the other. We put ourselves above the outsider.
Yeah.
And that can be just as dark and broken of a place as the younger brother trying to feed the pigs.
Right.
But there's still grace.
Right.
There's still redemption. And I think that that's the beautiful thing about this passage.
What do you think it says about God's character that we have the same invitation, not only to the sinner and the prostitute and the tax collector, but also to the Pharisee? What do we learn about who God is in the midst of all of that?
Man, I guess when I look through Scripture, when you look at the entire story of Scripture from Genesis to Revelation, the older I get, the more I just recognize God has this relentless pursuit of his people.
Yeah.
And it seems to be the case that his character is such that he will never give up on us.
Yeah.
At the very least, while we're alive on this planet.
Yeah.
But he's not giving up on us. He's chasing after us.
Yeah.
And the invitation is always there.
Yeah. Yeah, really. No, that's powerful. It really strikes me in terms of the theological term is like his immanence or his personal interaction with us in a way that is so one-to-one, which is obviously personified in Jesus, right? I think we haven't gotten here yet, but a key passage to understand all of Luke and Jesus' mission is Luke 19:10. The Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. We're lost for a reason. We're going to talk about Genesis here in a moment, about how this all relates back to how this is really all just an analogy for Genesis in our fall. But the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. He came personally in human flesh, though he was God, to be on a one-to-one basis with us, to love us, to have a personal relationship with us. And I don't know, as I grow in emotional intelligence and in like relational intensity, just like being with people in a way that matters, I'm just constantly floored of the sacrifices that God makes to be in relationship with us. I mean, I don't have a lot of patience for myself or for others. But the fact that he's willing to work with me day by day, that his grace is renewed every morning, that when I fall, he's there. When I'm making baby steps in the right direction, he's there. It's just hard to believe. He's at work at every moment. He's at work when I'm not at work. Actually, that's what Sabbath is about, is the reminder that God is at work even when I'm not at work. And really, he's the one doing most of that work anyway. But it's so much easier for me to work to earn something like that, like the elder brother would, than to rest in a father who runs to me, and that I have personal relationship with. I don't know.
Well, and it feels like the world would tell us that it's either or.
Right, exactly.
You either work really hard to get what you want, or you just squander away something that somebody else worked for. I mean, look at the way our generations are set against each other.
Yeah,
well, the older generations, they worked for all that we got. They made America what it is,
right.
And the young generation is just squandering it, and we're ruining it.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you that they said the same thing back in ancient Greece, back in ancient Rome, that you reach this height of prosperity that some people had to fight and work really hard for, and now, well, look at that young generation. And it feels like you have to be either the rule follower, the older brother,
right,
or the squandering younger brother.
Right.
And Jesus is saying, hey, there's a third way.
Right.
Just be my son.
Right.
Just be my daughter.
It's all the same in the end. It is both. No, that's good. let's talk before we jump into this connection to Genesis. What do you feel like are the practical implications of moving from sin to repentance to then walking in the Spirit day by day? What do you feel like this passage shows to us in terms of like, we know we're going to sin day by day. We know we're also called to continue to be His son and not let that sink us into the depths of despair like we're with the pigs.
Right.
So like, how is this a model for how we can live day to day with Jesus?
I think the big thing for me is that it really feels like a pendulum of either, squandering your inheritance or acting like you're a servant and trying to work for your father's love. It feels like there's this middle way, the middle part of the pendulum of saying, you know what, I'm just going to live in relationship with God.
Right.
It's going to be messy. It's going to be hard. I'm not going to do it well all the time. But I'm going to choose to live into that intimacy every day. And honestly, what you were saying just a minute ago really is essentially the gospel, the good news, that we're broken, that we're sinners, but we have an opportunity every day to live into the love that God has offered us.
Yeah.
I think one of the big things practically that will lead to us living as sons and daughters instead of as squanderers and rule followers is going to be your opportunity and your choice to preach the gospel to yourself every day. Yeah. To wake up every morning and say, God, I don't know what I'm going to do well today. I don't know what I'm going to do poorly today, but I entrust it to you. Yeah. I trust that you're going to love me regardless of how well I act today.
Yeah. I was also thinking about the aspect, something that you and I take seriously in terms of like daily confession, or at least confession in the midst of with God and with others. Confession is this practice that we talk about and is hard, and maybe like all of your baggage with that is thinking that's something that Catholic people do or Anglicans do, but it is something that really allows us to come face to face with the gospel in our lives. Like, you can't confess and not be just overwhelmed by like, man, I really need that grace. Man, when I really take account for the last 24 hours and think about what went right, what went wrong, it's hard for me to not be confronted with my need for grace. But it also is an opportunity to say, like, the younger son being reconciled with the father, like, I am sorry, like, thank you for that adoption. And then you get to pray in response, like, the party aspect is like, fill me with your Spirit. You always have to confess and then fill up that empty space with joy and be like, fill me with your Spirit. And that is like a daily practice that will like literally transform your life. Your willingness to day by day, last 24 hours, just be like, Lord, I'm sorry for all these things that I've done. I know I'm trying to do better every day. Fill me with your Spirit. Like, help me to walk with you. Let's throw a party. Yeah. Right? Every time we come together in reconciliation and redemption, it's a party. Like, it matters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, every single time we come back to the Lord and we say, God, like, I'm sorry. I don't know what was going through my brain. Heck, there's probably stuff I did that was sinful that I don't even know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But every time we come back to the Lord, like you said, it's a party. Yeah. It's an opportunity to reestablish the childhood that we have with God.
Yeah. An important aspect of this story is actually a connection that we can find, big picture connection to Genesis. We started off our whole church planting experience with Genesis because it is this foundational framework that we can view the whole world in. I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you consider that the younger and the elder son were in a safe space, that the father had provided for them, he'd done well, the sons had everything that they needed, they were in harmony and in perfect relationship with one another and with their father. You can say that's similar to like the Garden of Eden, where we were created, where we had harmony with creation, harmony in relationship with one another, and harmony in relationship with God. But as we've said, sin, rebellion, that time, we really define that as like choosing good and evil for ourselves.
And it seems like the younger son in this, he rebelled.
Some would say that, yes.
Kind of like how humans rebelled.
Good. That's good. That's good.
Connections.
But it's true, right? Like we see this in Genesis 1 through 11. We talked about this all the time, how Genesis 1 through 11 represent this spiral downward, where as soon as sin was introduced to the world, we have our first murder, then we have a whole village of murderers, then the whole world is like murdering and sinning one another. They're creating idols. They're not in relationship with one another or with God in any way that makes sense. They're struggling. It leads to the flood, which we thought was good, and then there's more sin, and we just find out that like there's corruption in our hearts. It's hard, and so the younger son, he rebels, and guess where he ends up? In the worst possible situation, where he is isolated not only from his father, but he even says, he confesses, I've sinned against God and you.
Yeah.
Right? So he's got isolation from God, his family, because of the work he is in, and creation, quote unquote, where he is not even at peace with his work or with like the work that he's doing because it's unclean, and he is struggling.
Well, I mean, that even calls back to the image of God.
Correct.
That we are called to work the land, to be in dominion over the world around us. And here he is, and his image of God is being told to feed slop to the pigs.
Exactly. And it's not working out. It's not doing well. And so we could be left there, right? Like that's where we leave, even in Genesis 50, where we're asking the question, like, how is God going to redeem all this stuff? How is this going to work? But we know he put together a game plan. Like we know that he put together an opportunity and chose to create an avenue by which the people could be redeemed. And so when we see the younger son say, like, he quote unquote comes to his senses, I'll be a servant. And God knows that that's going to be our typical relationship to him. That's our instinct, our sin corrupted instinct is like, oh, I'll figure this out and I'll do something. Right, I'll earn back God's favor. It'll work. But God says, no, like you're not going to earn it. We've made a covenant.
Yeah.
Like we love one another. We are in relationship. You are my son. We do not have the distance of a servant. We have the closeness of a father and a son. Right? And so this is the invitation of Jesus when he comes to seek and save what was lost. What was lost was in Genesis, where sin corrupted our relationship to him, and we became lost like darkness. We don't know the path, but Jesus has illuminated that path for us. What is different, and maybe what is like an echo, you can almost hear it from Genesis. You hear the echo of Cain's asking in Genesis 4, am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah. Right?
When asked in Genesis 4, God comes to Cain after he's killed Abel and said, where's your brother Abel? He knows where Abel is, obviously. Cain's response, am I my brother's keeper, is the ultimate, I don't even know the word for it, but just like the dashing away of responsibility. Yeah. Like it's the ultimate confession of like, I don't care, right?
Because the natural answer to the question is yes. You are your brother's keeper.
That's the great irony is like, yeah, you absolutely are.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of all of this.
And it feels like the older brother is in that same spot of anger.
Right.
Like it wouldn't surprise me if the older brother in Luke said, am I my brother's keeper? And would have these murderous intentions of his heart.
Right.
You know, which we know Jesus says, if you have hatred in your heart for your brother, like you've committed murder.
Right. And in the same way that God, the Father in Genesis 4, did not answer that question, the Father leaves this story open-ended to us. He throws the invitation out there, right? He goes, you lost nothing. Why can we not be excited about this reconciliation together? It's your choice.
Yep.
There is nothing that is more opposite of God's character than that willingness to not care, to not feel like you are part of the kingdom and responsible for reconciliation, like being agents of reconciliation, as 2 Corinthians calls us to. I don't know, it's just hard to believe. I know that's in me, and I see it every day, but when I am confronted with it, I'm like, man, who does that? That's crazy.
It's so hard. But guys, like, we have an opportunity every single day to choose reconciliation with God and reconciliation with each other. You know, with this whole quarantine, with this whole quarantine thing going on, like, we're stuck with each other. We're stuck with our families for like weeks on end.
Yeah, for real.
And, you know, we get an unexpected break from a lot of things, but that also brings up a lot of issues that might be going on.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage you guys, seek reconciliation in your relationships. Man, if you have something between you and a family member that you're stuck with for 3 weeks, I'd get that figured out.
Yeah.
I would ask them what's going on and offer forgiveness and ask for forgiveness. I mean, these are cool opportunities that we have to be in relationship with the people we love that are in our homes day by day.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, even yesterday, I was getting coached by my faith walking coach and was just even confessing, like, you know, I don't always have a good picture for what marriage is supposed to be like. I often wonder if the examples I've been given are like what kind of marriage I want to go towards, and was just given a really practical tool for how Hope and I can navigate the next couple of years of marriage. And it's like, as bad as it sounds, in some ways I was like, well, we don't have anything else to do. Like, we're stuck in the same apartment for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's an example of something like that's been on my heart for a while, and we're going to move in that direction. But yeah, I feel like the Lord is going to be at work in so many different avenues, that there's going to be the more corruption in our heart that's exposed in the next couple of weeks. But that just presents more opportunities for redemption and reconciliation.
Yeah, it really does. Well, guys, we're thankful that you joined us for this little bit. I think we're at like 30 to 40 minutes.
Yep.
I hope this is something that you guys enjoy. On Sunday, if you guys want to talk about this, if you have any thoughts on the passage or comments or questions, bring them to us on Sunday, and we'll chat about it.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't know if this is what we'll literally do every Sunday, but it seems to be what works for us. Conversation seems to be in spirit with what we've kept doing. So I'm sure there will be little changes. We'll use up all of Sam's time if we have to, because he's just a youth pastor, so he's not important. And but we really appreciate that, and we'll just see how it works.
Yep.
And keep praying and keep doing our best. So.
Yep. Well, we love you guys. Let's pray for you guys really quick. God, I am so thankful for this congregation. I am thankful for DelCo. It's just so many good people that you've given us. Lord, I pray blessings over them in this time. I pray grace over them as they seek to love on their family in close quarters. Continue to draw us near to you. Continue to draw us into intimacy with one another and with you. We're just so thankful for your Son being willing to break his body and shed his blood for us. Mm-hmm. We pray all these things in Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thank you.